Chapter 4 of Tractate Bava Kamma continues on the various laws of damages. The first Mishnah says, if an ox gores 4 or 5 oxen, but at irregular intervals, so it remains a tom, an animal not established as dangerous, meaning it would only require a half payment if it damages something, the last gored ox is paid first. If the goring ox is worth more than the payment, the excess is given to the second to last damaged animal. If there's still excess, it goes to the next prior animal. This opinion holds that the later damaged animals are repaid first. Others say the owner of the goring ox and the victim both must pay the damage. If a tom ox worth 200 coins gores an ox worth 200, and the carcass is worth nothing, they both receive 100 coins of value. If the ox then gores another animal worth 200, the latest gored animal takes 100 coins of the tom ox's value, and the owner and the preceding victim both take 50. If the ox gores another animal worth 200, the latest damaged party gets 100, the prior gets 50, and the owner of the tom ox and the first damaged guy both get 25 coins. The Gemara discusses the authorship of the first part in accordance with various opinions. It's explained it's like the opinion who holds that the damaged parties are legally considered to be creditors. However, based on the wording, it must be that each successive victim grabbed the goring ox to collect damages from it, so essentially became like a legal paid custodian. And then it gored the next guy's ox, which is why the last guy collects first. It's further amended to fit like this. The second clause of the Mishnah would be in accordance with the differing opinion. Based on a related discussion on a debate if somebody punches somebody in the head, if he owes him a sela or a mana, it tells that any silver referenced in verses from the Torah is accounted in Tyrian currency, and any amount of silver in rabbinic legal matters goes by the provincial currency. It quotes some related incidents on this. New Mishnah. If an ox is muad, established to be dangerous for some things but not for others, for instance, muad towards its own species but not towards other species, or muad towards people but not towards animals, or muad towards young animals but not old ones, it pays the full muad charge for goring animals that it's muad towards, and half payment for other animals. If it's muad towards specific dates, like it gores specifically on Shabbos, it would be muad on Shabbos and not on a weekday. It could revert back to a tam here if it goes 3 Shabbosim without goring. The Gemara debates particularities on the wording as to if the ox is known to be muad towards some species, but they're unsure regarding others, whether it's assumed to be muad for everything too. They debate this principle further. There are particularities of establishment of a muad mentioned. If an ox gores alternative oxen, it's established to be muad to gore alternatively, and it can also gore different species alternatively. If it gores an ox, donkey, and camel, it asks if the last ox goes with the first two or the last two, along with a similar question if it gored a donkey, camel, ox, and ox. And a similar question if it gores Shabbos, Sunday, and Monday, or Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, as to where the middlemost animal lies, and they're all left unresolved. If the ox gored on the 15th of the first month, and the 16th of the second, and the 17th of the third month, it's debated, similar to by the establishment of a nida period, if this is muad, or if it needs to gore an additional time to establish this. If the animal gored 3 separate times right after hearing a shofar blown, it's established as muad by a shofar. Even the first one counts, and it's not considered as if it just got scared. New Mishnah. If somebody's ox gored an ox of the temple treasury, or vice versa, the owner is exempt, as the verse says, if the ox of a man strikes the ox of his fellow, implying no liability involving the temple treasury either way. If the ox of a Jewish person gores the ox of a Canaanite specifically, he is exempt, and vice versa. Whether tam or muad, he must repay him. The Gemara debates the verse, implying the lack of liability within the temple treasury for being damages or damaging others by their oxen. Others say it implies the inverse, that a person is liable to pay in full, whether it's tam or muad, if his ox damages the temple treasury. Based on this verse, additionally, these monetary laws apply specifically to Jewish people. So it says technically everybody else should be exempt, but it was said that as the Canaanites refused to keep the 7 Noahide laws, they had to, at the very least, abide by the monetary laws. It cites verses as sources for this concept. It debates what reward non-Jewish people receive for fulfilling commandments. It says that if a non-Jewish person studies Torah, he's considered as great as a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, and it's said that they don't receive a reward for fulfilling commandments that they were commanded to do. They instead receive reward for fulfilling commandments they were not commanded to do. It said the law of one-sided lack of monetary obligation was taught to officials of the Roman government along with the entire Torah, and they say they agreed with everything besides for this one portion, but decided to not tell the authorities about it to be nice in case people got upset. So essentially what it seems to be saying is that non-Jewish people don't really have any applicability within Jewish monetary law. meaning there would be liability for a non-Jewish person's damage, but not vice versa. And evidently, as it states here, this was clearly a very controversial point. However, it would be important to note that this no longer has application, as the Gemara later establishes the principle of Dina de Malchusa Dina, the law of the country is the law, literally, which essentially means that there is a religious obligation to abide by the laws of whatever country you're in. So practically, monetary law has applicability towards everybody both ways, with no exceptions as the country decides. It discusses some related verses on the lack of commandment to fight against Moabites and similar, along with additional similar principles with Kuthians, specifically by lack of liability for monetary damages, along with debate if they're considered to be proper converts. New Mishnah: if the ox of a mentally competent person gored the ox of a deaf-mute, insane person, or minor, or vice versa, the owner is exempt. If the ox of a mentally incompetent person gored something, the court appoints an agent to watch the ox, and the court accepts testimony regarding it before the agent. If the muad ox was being kept by the agent, and the deaf-mute becomes able to hear and talk, or the insane person becomes sane, or the minor becomes an adult, it's debated if the ox reverts to tam or stays as a muad. An ox of an arena that killed a person is not liable to be killed, as the verse implies an exclusion of oxen made to gore things. The Gemara explains an apparent contradiction as to if the agent is appointed by a tam to collect the half payment between clauses, so it explains the second clause is where the animal is being considered to be a muad. In regards to the appointment of an agent, it debates as to whether the best quality produce is taken from orphans or from their agent. Some say it's from the orphans, as then people won't become agents. Others say it's from the agents, as they're repaid once the orphans become adults. It further debates if the court appoints an agent to allow the damaged party to collect payment by a tam, based on several other cases. There's additional discussion on these principles. Also, it said the agent would need to pay if the ox he's watching killed somebody, but he would not need to pay for atonement, which is an additional amount for the death of the individual, as the orphan doesn't need to pay atonement. It argues as to who holds this opinion. It also debates as to how this value is assessed and whether this payment is paid if the ox that killed somebody was owned by two people, or whether they give two half payments. It also asks if security is taken from somebody who needs to pay this obligation. In regards to the point of the animal's muad status reverting if it changes ownership, it said if somebody borrowed it and it was a muad, the borrower and owner both pay half damages. If it became a muad under the borrower's care and is returned to the owner, the borrower would then be exempt and the owner pays half damages. The logic of this is debated as to if the borrower needs to presume the ox was a muad. This is further discussed. It also debates if an ox of an arena can be used as an offering or not. It argues on this from various sources. It quotes a source which says an arena ox is not liable to be put to death if it kills somebody, and it is valid as an offering as it's considered as if it was coerced. New Mishnah: if an ox gored somebody and killed them, if it was muad, the owner pays the atonement fee called kaifer. This is not paid if the animal was tam. Either way, the animal was put to death. This also applies if the killed person was a child. If the ox gored a slave or maidservant, it's stoned, and the owner gives 30 sala'im to the owner of the slave, no matter the worth of the slave. The Gemara asks, how is there a case where there's a muad ox if oxen are killed when they're tam, apparently? So it says that the ox attempted to kill 3 people here, which is why it's being executed. Others disagree, saying you can't assess an animal's intentions, so it must be that it either mortally wounded 3 people or killed a person, ran away before it could be recaptured, and then repeated. Or it's where the witnesses were discredited, or it's where the witnesses recognize the owner but not the ox, and the owner is responsible to at least watch all the cattle. It cites the verse saying the animal that kills a person is put to death, and also that the animal can't be eaten from after or benefited from. It further expounds on these verses, which teach these points. These are discussed along with similar related points. It qualifies the point on the set sum repayment for an ox killing a slave. It discusses additional verses which show a man or woman have repayment given if they're injured and their damages are repaid in a similar manner, in regards to inheritance if they die. There are further points here, and it says if the ox killed a slave on accident, there's no necessity to pay the set 30 coin fine, and it cites a verse as source. This also applies with the kaifer payment if a regular person is killed, that it's not given if the ox killed the man accidentally, and it cites sources. Others debate this. Some suggest if there's no kaifer or 30 coin fine, there would still be the general damages payment. This is argued on based off of discussion of additional cases. It has unresolved points if this is comparable to a fire unintentionally killing somebody. It further debates if there's liability for kaifer payments based on verses. It also quotes verses saying the ox is killed, and there's kaifer payment even if the ox kills a child. It further debates over the sources for these laws. New Mishnah: if an ox rubbed itself against a wall and the wall collapsed, killing a man, or if the ox was trying to kill an animal and accidentally killed a man, or to kill a Canaanite and killed a Jewish person, or tried to kill a non-viable miscarried baby and killed a viable one, the ox is exempt. The Gemara debates if the ox is exempt from being put to death, but not the kafir payment, or if it's exempt from both. There would be liability of kafir, as the ox is a muad to knock walls onto people specifically, and it didn't intend to kill a man. It was just rubbing against the wall for enjoyment to scratch itself, which is known as it kept using the wall after it fell. Also, the ox must have been moving constantly against the wall as it fell, so it's not a case similar to pebbles knocked around as the ox walks, where there would not be a kafir liability. We cite a source which states that there would still be a kafir liability even when the ox kills unintentionally. There is a debate if there's liability for payment if an ox accidentally injures somebody, based on if the laws are learnt from whether the ox pays kafir, or from the laws of if the ox is put to death. It debates as to the liability if the ox tried to kill one person but accidentally killed a different person. New Mishnah. The ox that belongs to women, orphans, or the guardian of orphan children, or a wild ox, a consecrated ox, or the ox of a convert without heirs, are all liable to be put to death if they kill somebody. Others say those last three are exempt as they're ownerless. The Gemara cites scriptural sources for these points. Also, it says if an ox was consecrated after it gored, this would evidently imply it's also not put to death, and it cites sources. New Mishnah. An ox that's being taken out of a courthouse to be stoned, and it's consecrated then, right there, at that point, it's not a valid consecration. If it was slaughtered, the meat is prohibited from benefit. If it was consecrated before the verdict, it's a valid consecration, and if it was slaughtered, it can be benefited from. New point. If an owner left his animal with an unpaid guardian, a borrower, a paid guardian, or a renter, and the animal damaged something, the person taking care of the animal currently makes the payment, be it full for a muad or half for a tom. The Gemara cites a similar point. Although, if a guardian returns the animal to the owner after the guilty verdict, it's debated if this is valid as to whether this returned item has worth. Others say it is allowed, as it's similar to, say, a thief returning chametz, leavened bread, after Passover. And the dispute is actually whether the court can judge the case of an ox if the ox isn't actually there, which would make a difference with the original owner, as if he had received it first, and the court needed the ox there to judge, he could have chased the ox away so that way it wouldn't suffer prosecution. In regards to the different levels of guarding the animal, it must be where he was guarding the animal with a lesser form of guarding, so that way there's no negligence, and the unpaid guardian would be legally fulfilling his obligation. Further, it's held if an ox was being watched by an unpaid guardian and it damaged others, the guardian is liable, but if it was damaged by others, the guardian is exempt. This must be where the guardian accepted responsibility for the ox's damage, but didn't think that others would damage it. New Mishnah. If the owner tied his ox with a rein or locked it properly within a gate and it broke out and damaged, it's agreed he is liable if it's a tom ox, and disputed if it's muad. Some say they're liable if there were lesser forms of guarding it, others say these suffice, so he'd be exempt, and others say they're liable no matter what, and it must be slaughtered. The Kamma explains the debate further, as it's based off of some scriptural verses. The fourth opinion holds that the owner is exempt whether it's a tom or muad, as he agrees it's exempt if it's a muad, so logically then it should be for sure exempt if it's a tom. Some say this opinion would hold that if it was actually a muad ox, he'd still have to pay half payment. Others disagree with this. It cites verses that say the muad ox must be slaughtered, along with additional sources. And that's the end of chapter 4.